Wow. Hello. What a welcome. Thank you so much. My goodness. It's like having the space shuttle take off or something. After that, I think my talk is going to be a little bit of a damp disappointment. I'm really sorry. But thank you all so much for having us here today, particularly to all you at Crosfields School, Reading, for this Children's Authors Live event. I mean, this is kind of my home patch. I only live about half an hour away from here, or about 2 hours if you go and kayak down the Thames from here. So this is my home patch, and thank you to everyone at Crossfield for welcoming me here, but also to the thousands of kids who are watching this event streamed all over the UK, from Cheshire to Dorset, even around the world. So we have people in India tuning in and watching this, and a massive hello to all of my friends in India as well. You might have seen some of my deadly television programs, or some of the expedition programs where we've gone in search of new species in exotic places around the world. But today, I want to talk to you about writing and about my young adult fiction, the Falcon Chronicles, the latest of which, Wilds of the Wolf, has just come out. So how did my story begin? Well, I was lucky enough to grow up not so far away from where we are right now, in a small holding, a kind of small farm, surrounded by rescue animals. So we had an asthmatic donkey who could never get through a brae without pretty much collapsing. We had a couple of psychotic guard dog geese. You couldn't get anywhere near them without them going nuts and trying to bite your ankles. We even had a tiny little duckling called Twit, who would follow my mum around the house and sit in the washing up bowl while she did the washing up. So it was kind of very natural to me from a very young age that whatever I did with my life, it was going to be outdoors, it was going to be working with wild animals. And I've always had this big connection with nature and this big certainty that is how I was kind of destined to spend my life. And I guess that's how it developed as I got older as well. So I did various different things for a living. The first proper job that I had was working for an organization called the Rough Guides, which does travel guides to various places around the world. And I wrote their guidebook to Indonesia and spent a long time in places like New Guinea, traveling in the rainforest there, and learning a lot about how to travel in really extreme environments like the rainforest. I then went on to do my expedition leader qualificationship with the Indian Army in the mountains of the Himalayas. And the places that I was traveling in and I was getting really close to and learning about would end up becoming a big part, an integral part of the books that I would write later in life. After a while, I was still writing, but I came up with an idea for a television program. And I went out to the rainforest in Colombia with a video camera, just myself, and I filmed myself wandering around in the forest, catching snakes and spiders and scorpions, and I made it into a program, and I sold it to the National Geographic. And they took me on as their adventurer in residence, which has to be the coolest job title in the whole world. I even had a bunch of business cards printed that said, Steve Backshall, adventurer in residence, which was just awesome. And I spent a little while with them learning the whole business of telling a story on screen, because that's very, very different to telling a story in print and in novels and books. But I never lost that joy of writing, and I always knew that it was something I'd come back to. I've now been working in television for 16 years, filming wild animals, and it's been very, very good to me. But I think I treasure just as much as those times on camera, the times that I've spent writing and the times that I've spent putting together my fiction novels. So the first one, Tiger Wars, was a kind of moment of serendipity, really. I'd had in the back of my mind this idea for a couple of characters who were going to be on the run and kind of solving wildlife crimes. And that was pretty much it. That was about as much as I had in my head for what these novels were going to be about. And until then, I think I'd written about 6 or 7 books, but they'd all been factual books. They'd all been natural history books about how animals work and about venom and about giant animals and things like that. And I was with my publisher, and I was giving them all sorts of ideas for books I could write on animals. And then at the end, I said, you're going to think I'm crazy, but I've got this idea for a fiction novel. What do you think? And I said, just what I've said to you now, and she said, yeah, that's great. I'll have 6 of them. Which then left me with a bit of a dilemma, because I have a really busy life. You know, I spend most of my time on the road filming wildlife, living in the jungle under a bit of leaky tarpaulin, and I don't have a tremendous amount of time on my hands. But it seemed like a great idea and a great opportunity, so I took her up on it. And an awful lot now of my writing is done while I'm traveling. So when I'm at home, I sometimes find that if I'm in the office, sat at the laptop, there are just too many distractions. There are too many things that are kind of calling for my attention. I've got the email, I've got the internet, I've got the garden needs doing, I've got the washing up that needs to be done. All of a sudden, all these things come crowding in around me. Whereas if I'm actually off on an expedition, and if I'm on a long drive in the back of a minibus, there are none of those distractions, and I can just completely focus on the writing, and I will literally sit for 10 hours in the back of a minibus on the laptop typing away. This one particular expedition down to Antarctica that I went on beginning of last year, I was on a boat for 6 weeks going down into South Georgia and the Falklands and eventually down to the Antarctic Peninsula, and I spent every single spare minute sat at my laptop writing, and I wrote a whole book on that trip while I was going down there, which was great because I had something to do while everyone else was lying in their bunks feeling seasick. But it was also quite challenging as well because, we went through force 10 gales. We had seas breaking 30 meters over the top of our boat. In occasion, it was difficult even to keep yourself in your bunk bed without being thrown out on the floor. And I was still having to find a way of sitting at my laptop and writing while my laptop just kept going over here, and then over here, and then over here, and backwards and forwards. But somehow, I managed to knock out a book in that one journey. And that's kind of the focus that I've had to have to manage to continue writing these books. So this is how my first book begins. It begins in the forests of India with a tigress, beautiful tigress, and her vulnerable cub alongside her. And they're being pursued by a shadowy organization known as the Clan. They're an organization that I deliberately didn't give up much information about it. I kind of eked that through the books as it went on, because they're an organization that's supposed to have a tremendous amount of power and a tremendous amount of influence, but one that we never see. We never actually really know who they are as a civilization, as a world population, but they have an incredible influence. And I just wanted to bring in the information about them very, very slowly through the books. My main character is called Saker, and he's named after the Saker falcon, which is a bird of prey. And he has many of the attributes that his namesake has as well. He is very, very tireless. He's always on the move. He's always, his senses and his perception is constantly awake and looking for stimulus. He is a superb hunter. He is a fantastic tracker. And he has the tattoo, a simple monochrome tattoo of a Saker falcon on his body, as does everybody else in the clan. And we start to learn through the books that these members of the clan are very much associated with one animal. That becomes their kind of totem animal, and they have many of the characteristics of that totem animal. So this is kind of, I guess, quite an important thing for me, was the fact that about halfway through writing the last book, as the second one had come out, someone said to me in a book signing, they said, "So these main characters that you have, Saker, who is the boy, and Sinta, who is the girl, that's you and your sister, right?" And I went, no, they just came out of imagination. They got nothing to do with me and my sister. And then I started thinking, and I realized that Sinta, who is the main female character, is incredibly caring. She's someone who wants to be a doctor. She's someone who is very, very good with human beings, has a very kind of open heart and an open soul. And that is my sister, absolutely down to a T. My sister is a nurse who works with kids who have cancer, and she is all of those things. And then Saker is a boy who is obsessed with martial arts, who is much more comfortable with animals than he is with human beings, who is, I guess, a bit of a pain at times, can be thoroughly irritable, and that's me. And I didn't realize this. It was totally subconscious. I'd kind of written these two characters, and I've written 2.5 books worth of these characters without realizing that I had based them on me and my sister. And I think she was much more complimented by that than I was. The rest of the members of the clan, as I said, they all have their totem animals. So, for example, if you had... Who knows what this animal is? Just shout it out. Ocelot, yes, fantastic, an ocelot. If a member of the clan was associated with an ocelot, then they would have that simple dark tattoo somewhere on their body that represented the ocelot, but that more than that, they would have, as part of their own abilities, some of the abilities of the ocelot. So perhaps they would be more comfortable moving at night, perhaps they would be a superb climber, perhaps they would have fantastically perceptive eyesight. And then if they were this, who knows what this is? Just shout it out. Can anyone be more specific than a snake or a viper? Someone say sidewinder. Fantastic, really good. Yes, absolutely, a sidewinder. So if someone a clan member was associated with the sidewinder, perhaps they would have a particularly sinuous serpentine movement, and perhaps they might be particularly expert at camouflage, at not being seen, and that would be a big advantage to this group of young boys that we are beginning to learn may have nefarious, dark purposes. And then if they were this animal, who knows what this is? It's not a snake. Lynx, yes, absolutely. If a clan member was associated with the lynx, again, they would have the lynx tattoo, and they would have some of the attributes of that animal. So perhaps they would be very stealthy. Perhaps they would be a surprisingly good climber. Maybe they would be more effective moving at night. So all of these things come together to bring up the members of the clan who work together as a group, and they're sent out on missions to do things that most of the time may seem to be quite immoral. I put this photo in to remind me that a big part of the purpose of the clan is that they live in nature and that they are very, very closely associated with it and that they learn its ways. So they're very, very expert at things like tracking. They're very expert at making a living from the land. And there are many different things that I try to bring in from my own knowledge and experience to allow the clan members to have these abilities. So the first book is very much focused on the tiger. And the tiger is a very, very important animal to me, as I'm sure it is to many other people around the world. It's a great icon in wildlife and a great icon in conservation as well. It's this incredibly powerful, beautiful, dramatic big cat, yet one which is under extraordinary threat from us as human beings. So many of the threats that face this animal are down to poaching and the fact that people want to take on the strength of the tiger. So that connects, I guess, to my main themes, is the fact that people believe that by consuming parts of the tiger, they can also acquire its strength. So if you drink tiger wine or whiskey that's been steeped in the bones of a tiger, then you will take on the dramatic strength of the tiger. It's absolutely false. It's definitely not true. It has no basis in scientific fact. But because of that, many thousands of these animals have been taken. In India alone, there were perhaps 100,000 tigers at the turn of the last century. Now there are probably only about 1,500. And in the wild over the whole world, there's probably only 3,000, which is a terrible tragedy. And it is absolutely possible that we could lose these animals from our planet in our lifetime. A big part of the whole process of writing these books was to try and weave a conservation thread through them. I wanted to make sure that no one had to take that. If you don't want to, I try not to make the books preachy. If you don't want to listen to the conservation message, it's no problem. There's plenty of action and adventure in there to keep people interested. But if only a tiny fraction of the people that read these books think, wow, I never knew that about tigers. Actually, I would really like to do something to protect them and to save them, then I figure that it could make a difference, because what conservation needs is heroes. We need people who are prepared to stand up and say, I think that we can make the world a better place, and I'm prepared to make a stand and try and make a difference. And I'm just hoping that a few people that read these books might come away with that message and want to try and do just that. So my first book begins in the lowlands of India. It begins in a tea plantation with the local people. And Sekar and Sinta come together. They're brought together by chance, really, and they both find themselves on the run from the clan. They travel up through the northern part of India. You can see here, this is a typical northern Indian forest. Actually, looking at this, you can really see why the tiger's camouflage works, because they have those incredible gaudy orange, black, and white stripes, and that might seem to be the worst possible camouflage. You might think that they would stand out like a sore thumb just about anywhere. But you see them in a forest like this, when the light is cutting down through the trees and creating those slats of bright orange light and dark shadow, and all of a sudden you can see why the tiger's camouflage is so effective. The journey then takes them up into the foothills of the Himalayas and eventually into the mighty Himalayas themselves. And this is a place that I've had the great privilege of spending a lot of time, and it's somewhere that I find really inspiring. In the Alps in Europe, you can be wandering in the mountains, and the mountaintops can be 800 meters above you, and they feel absolutely dazzling. In the Himalayas, they can be 3,000 meters above you. It's an environment that totally dominates us as a human being, makes us feel vulnerable and small and fragile. And I like that. I like the thought that landscapes can be bigger and more challenging than us as human beings, and we cannot conquer them. Eventually, Saker and Sinter find themselves led towards a place which I'd modelled on somewhere very specific. I'd modelled it on a citadel that I saw in the mountains of Bhutan. And there's this whole Hollywood kind of sequence where they have to break into this citadel and liberate the tigers that have been kept captive within. And I tried to lean on my experiences of climbing and also on the environments themselves. One of the big parts of that actually is keeping a diary. And I have to say that anyone out there who's thinking about getting into writing, you have to start keeping a diary. The absolute fact of the matter is that we remember all the big things in life. We will always remember the moment that we saw a tiger coming out of the undergrowth. We'll always remember the moment where we saw a peregrine falcon hitting another bird on the wing. What we don't remember are kind of the important bits, really. We don't remember the scents, the smells, the small details, the things that just disappear with memory, but actually are the most important things when you come to telling a story. When you come to bring a place to life, it's all those little details, the things that disappear through time, that will make that story live in the minds of your readers. And the only way you can do that is by taking notes and taking diaries. So from a very young age, I always kept a diary on my travels. So the tiger, this extraordinary icon. I mean, this is definitely a male tiger. Look at that. It almost has a mane like a lion. A huge, big cat, well over 300 kilos when it's fully grown. One of the most powerful creatures on the planet, yet massively at threat from us as human beings. And my two characters, Saker and Sinter, throughout the course of the first book, start to wake up to the power that they have, the ability that they could have to change the world as we know it and to really make a difference. And again, I hope that's something that some of the readers will associate with and think, yeah, if I stand up, if I have a voice of my own, maybe I could make a big change as well. So that brings me on to my second book in the series, which was Ghost of the Forest. A lot of people had said that there is this whole idea of a difficult second novel, and that was definitely true for me. I found this so much harder to write than the first one, and a lot of that was down to the fact that it had a less simple narrative through it. My two main characters start off by being separated and finding a way of having these two separate narratives coming together and still working alongside each other. I found so hard. And that's one of the big challenges with writing. I think that when it's really going well, it's exactly like there's a movie going on in your head and you're sitting recording it. You're sitting just typing and your fingers can't keep up with the speed that the story is going on. When it's going badly, it's a nightmare, and it doesn't matter what you do and how long you sit down for, your chances of actually creating something of any use are pretty much zero. And I hit a massive brick wall when I was trying to write Ghost of the Forest, because it just wasn't happening in my head. I was finding it really challenging. But luckily, I'd set it in a place that I love, which is the tropical rainforest, and specifically the tropical rainforest of Borneo. I've been lucky enough to do lots and lots of expeditions there over the last 20-odd years, and it's somewhere that I do know the sights and the smells and the sounds incredibly well. And so when I was really struggling to try and think of a way of making this story come to life, I just put myself back into one of those expeditions where I was there in the forests and remember waking up in the morning to the whoop-whoop song of gibbons across the top of the trees, of the mist sort of moving in between the forest canopy, of how it feels to be covered in leeches and ticks and mites, how it feels to see a hornbill just zipping across the top of the trees, and try and write as much as possible about my own experiences there. I was also writing about the animals that live in Borneo, things like the orangutan. Orangutan actually means man of the forest in Borneo, and it is this incredibly charming, beautiful ape, but one that is under enormous threat. And that's mostly down to deforestation. It's down to the fact that their forests are being removed. And this also brought me along to the other ghosts of the forest. So one of the ghosts of the forest was the orangutan. The other was the people that they share that forest with, the inhabitants that have been there for thousands of years. There are many different tribes that live in Borneo, but to me the most fascinating is one called the Penan. The Penan, there's probably only a few thousand Penan left in the forests of Borneo, but they have the same lives that they've lived for an eternity. So they still make all of their living out of the forest. They still know which plants they can eat and which ones they can't, which plants they can use as a poison for hunting. They know how to live with absolute comfort in this environment that to us as Westerners, and to the people in India as well, can be incredibly challenging and difficult. And the big reason that the forests are disappearing in Borneo is something called oil palm. So I was lucky enough to spend a good deal of the early 1990s in Borneo, and I flew over this huge rainforest island in a plane, and to every distance out into the horizon, all you could see was rainforest. The entire island seemed to be covered in jungle. And I went back in the early 2000s and looked down from that self-same plane, and all you can see is oil palm. The forests have been cut down to an extraordinary degree for this one substance, which is used for a whole variety of different products that we have right here, from soaps to cereals. And the thing that really, really brings home quite what a disaster that is when you go into a rainforest and then when you go into a palm oil plantation. In the rainforest, it is deafening. There are constant sounds from the frogs and the birds and the cicadas and the crickets. It can be this phenomenal orchestra of natural sounds. And then you go into the palm oil plantations and they are silent, deathly silent. You could hear a pin drop because everything there has gone. All of the life has disappeared and cannot be sustained in those palm oil plantations. So I'm again modeled this a terrific amount on the expeditions that I've had, and you can see from my face there, quite happy expeditions that I've had in the forests of Borneo, and particularly one where we were lucky enough to drop into this sinkhole, this huge cave system in the Mulu Mountains in Borneo. And we were the first people ever to explore the cave systems that lay at the bottom of it and that stretched off into these extraordinary limestone karst mountains. So what I did was I took my hero, Seika, and I essentially stuck him in the place that I had been in myself. I put him into this phenomenal cavern. I mean, just for a sense of scale, that one big white stalactite you can see there, like a kind of white tooth hanging down from the roof of that sinkhole, was probably about the height of a 4-story building. So this is gigantic, this sinkhole. And in the bottom, there was an extraordinary cave system that went on for miles and miles and miles. But it was somewhere that I had personally had quite a chilling experience, because when I got down there, I got into a squeeze, into a small cave that led on into the big cavern system beyond, and I got stuck. And I can remember just the sense of overwhelming panic from being down there and thinking there are hundreds of tons of rock above me crushing down on me, and there is nothing I can do about this. And I mean, as it was back on that expedition, the guy that I was with said to me, well, Steve, I mean, you are pretty stuck. I mean, really what we're going to have to do is just wait for a few days until you lose some weight, and then maybe we'll be able to drag you out. And that somehow gave me enough impetus to empty my lungs and manage to squeeze myself through and on into the next new caverns. But I set Seika all the same challenges that I had. So here you can see the floor of the cave is just covered with centuries of bat droppings, and that bat droppings attracts cockroaches and crickets and centipedes, and it is an incredibly creepy place. However, eventually, Seika manages to find his way back out into the rainforest, and he comes charged with a new purpose that he and Sinta together are going to make a difference. And they're going to go out and they are going to try and solve some of these big problems, the problems that I see around me in my job every day. And that brought me on to my latest book, Wilds of the Wolf, which deals with the animal which is my favorite and has always been my favorite, the wolf. So I set it in the Arctic, way up in a very remote peninsula in Siberia, a place that has been known over recent years because people have discovered actual mammoth carcasses there, and mammoth carcasses that actually look like they only just died, despite the fact that thousands of years ago, at the end of the last ice age, would have been when they perished, but they've been preserved by this incredible cold, dry environment, so they still look like they only just keeled over and died just weeks ago. The story begins with my main characters out mushing with dog sleds. And again, this is something that I have always loved. I mean, I am a dog person through and through, and I think if you are a dog person and you love dogs, then being alongside them gives you a lot back. It makes you feel happy, it fills you with positivity, and nothing more so than being alongside sled dogs who are running up in the Arctic, because they are so happy. You see these dogs, and they may well be, I say 16 of them tied into one sled. They will run and run and run, perhaps run for an hour and a half dragging the sled, and then they get given a rest and they'll go, right, let's go again. And you can see just the vitality and the enthusiasm in their eyes when you go out to try and hitch the dogs to the sled in the morning, and there may be 100 dogs from which you have to select the few that are going to get to run on the sled. Every single one is battling for the musher's attention, demanding to be the one that gets to go on the sled. And I was really interested in this relationship between mushers and dogs, and so I actually created a new character for this book who was Yantar, the lead dog in the sled. And the lead dog in a dog sledding group is really important. It's an animal that has charge over the sled, that has almost as much charge over where the sled might go as the musher himself. And I developed this character throughout the book of the dog itself because I guess I wanted to have something that wasn't a human character, but that had an enormous amount of empathy from us as the reader towards it. And also, we featured a tremendous amount their close cousin, the wolf. I'm sure a lot of you will know that every single breed of dog that we have in our homes here in the UK or anywhere else around the world is directly descended from the grey wolf. And it is my favourite animal, my most treasured animal, an animal that has an incredibly complex and sophisticated breadth of means of communicating with the other members of its pack, an animal that has a howl that can make every hair on the back of your neck stand up. They are incredibly beautiful, and again, they are under tremendous threat from us as human beings. And a lot of that is down to just pure fear, really. We see them as being an animal that can have a tremendous negative impact on us, despite the fact that they have very, 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 very rarely had any fatal attacks on human beings in the wild around the world. They are an animal that we have demonized, that we see as being a personification of the evil, menacing side of nature, and particularly people that keep livestock, and I do understand this, see them as being a threat to their livelihood. And because of that, wolves have been persecuted across the planet to a phenomenal degree. They would once have ranged over pretty much the entire northern hemisphere, obviously apart from the seas. But now they are only found in tiny, tiny pockets of land, and they can be incredibly challenging to see. I've spent 5 days sat in a hide in Transylvania, sat watching, waiting to try and get a glimpse of a wolf. We even had to plaster the whole of the front of the hide in horse manure just to mask our scent so that this animal wouldn't see us or smell us. Until finally one night at about midnight, this sole wolf came in at about 100 meters away, and we managed to finally get our shot of it. They're really challenging to find and film in the wild. And also, the other big animal that features in this particular book, because it had to. You can't be in the Arctic without featuring the creature that left these footprints. Who knows what that would be? Just shout it out. The polar bear, yes, absolutely. You might notice, actually, these footprints are in relief. They're higher up than the snow. The reason for that is that the polar bear is so hefty and heavy that as it walks, it compresses the snow and it forms into thick, dense ice. It becomes the hardest part of the substrate. And then as the sun or the wind whips away the rest of the snow, all that remains are the footprints higher up than the snow around it. And yes, this fabulous animal, the polar bear, because when you are in parts of the Arctic where there are polar bears, you have to be constantly aware of their potential presence. It's one of the only animals that can really be dangerous to us as human beings for the simple reason that they feed on other mammals and other warm-blooded prey, and they will smell prey from a really big distance away. They've been seen swimming in a dead straight line for 20 miles towards food that they can only have smelt from 20 miles away. So my two main characters inevitably end up in an encounter with a polar bear. I'm not going to spoil it to you. There's not going to be any tales of what finally happens when they do have this encounter with a polar bear. But that is not the only big dramatic Hollywood encounter that happens in Wilds of the Wolf. There is a big chase sequence in true James Bond style, in snowmobiles rocketing over this Arctic landscape, hurtling over a frozen lake where, again, I'm sort of relying on past experiences to talk about what it's like moving over frozen ice and looking down through that shiny dark ice to the dark, dark waters below, knowing that those waters are going to be below freezing, and thinking how terrifying it would be to plummet through the ice into that water. And also the sensation of being on a snowmobile and traveling on a snowmobile. But here there's a slight difference, because my two main characters are in the dog sled, and they're chasing away with these dogs mushing while they're being hounded by armed guards in snowmobiles. I mean, it really does sound like something out of a James Bond novel. I promise I didn't steal it. But that is the main massive chase sequence that's in Wilds of the Wolf. Very quickly, I am in the process of writing the 4th book in the series. It's called Shark Seas. A big apology to anyone who expected to see that this year. It was supposed to come out this year, but I have been so snowed under with all of my filming work and all the expeditions that I've been doing that unfortunately I haven't quite had time to finish it yet. But I promise that I will. And it is obviously going to have as its main focus sharks, which are probably my greatest passion, and also the group of creatures that is most threatened by us as human beings around the world. We probably take around 100 million sharks from the world's oceans every single year, while sharks take fewer than 10 people. To put that into a little bit of perspective, you are more likely to be killed by a falling soft drinks machine than you are by a shark. You are hundreds of times more likely to be killed by being struck by lightning than you are by a shark. We have this fear of sharks, which is totally unjustified, and yet we could easily destroy them because we take them in such numbers from our seas. So that's something that I really want to focus on in this last book. And again, as I've said, please read the books just purely for the action, for the adventure, for maybe some of the information about how to live in the wild, for tracking, for learning to live off natural environments and find food to forage from the world around you. If that's all you take from the books, I am absolutely fine and happy with that. I think that reading is itself worth something that we all should be focusing on doing. It allows your imagination to flourish apart from anything else. But if there are just a few people who can see the main themes running through these books and be challenged by them and think that they might want to stand up and do something about them, that they might personally want to have a voice and make a change about some of the big problems that are facing our planet, then I would be very, very happy indeed, because our world needs heroes like you. Right, okay, it's now time to do some questions. So, I've got a couple of friends here with microphones. We're going to start off with some questions from the guys here at Crosfield, and then I will bounce out to questions that have been sent in from other people around the country. So, what have we got? Number 1 from out there in the crowd.
What inspired you to write Ghost to the Forest?
So I was inspired to write Ghost of the Forest from the fact that Borneo and the rainforest is probably the environment I spend the most time in, for the simple reason that if we go out looking for an orangutan or a harpy eagle or a jaguar and we don't find it, we will find something else. The rainforest is the most biodiverse environment on Earth. There are always hundreds of different kinds of frogs and insects and snakes. So I spend an awful lot of my life in that kind of environment. A couple of weeks' time, I will be out in the rainforest in Guyana, just living in the rainforest with a couple of friends, filming wildlife. That's how I spend my life. So the fact that that environment is threatened is something that I very gently wanted to bring to the public attention, but it was always also an environment that I felt that I personally could bring to life because I know it so well. And, as I've said, one of the first things that an author is told is write about what you know, write about the things that are dear to you, write about the things that you're passionate about, because those are the things you're going to be most capable of bringing to life. Okay, I've got a question here from Newport Junior School, and the question says, in your adventures, do you come across creatures you've never seen before, and do you include these in your books? So yes, we have very deliberately gone out on expeditions solely with the purpose of looking for animals that not just I have never seen before, but that no one has ever seen before. Trying to find species that are new to science. That's been a big driver of some of our expeditions. On one in particular, we went down into an extinct volcano looking for new species, and we found everything we found there, because they'd not experienced people before, were kind of confiding and fine with us being close to them, and overwhelmingly new to science. So we found the largest rat on the planet, the Basavi giant woolly rat. It was about that big, about the size of a small dog, and it sat in front of us, just grooming and eating and completely oblivious to the fact that we were there, totally new to science. And being able to be close to something like that and know that no one from the outside world has ever seen it before is incredible. I think I've never felt more like an explorer or an adventurer than I did in that moment. As to whether I include those in my books, it's not something that Seika and Sinta do. I think it's kind of important that they deal with things that people might have some familiarity with. So I think for them to all of a sudden go out and start searching for new species would be a bit of a departure from what I've had them doing so far. It's more about the fact that Seika, particularly, and the clan are very much in tune with the environment as it is, and they are aware of everything there. They can choose the foods they might want to eat to help them to survive. They can choose the places that they might want to sleep and build a shelter there, rather than them going out and looking for things that are new. Should we take another question from the audience?
Are your stories based on your real life experiences?
Yes. So, as I've said, I think it's really, really important that you talk about the things that you know and the things that you understand. You know, I was told right from the beginning that, you know, if you have grown up in Reading, then trying to write a book about growing up in the Bronx in America is going to be a massive challenge, because everything there about life is going to be new to you, and you're not going to be writing about it as you would do from personal experience. For me, when I go out on an expedition, I write all the time. I write down every single thing I see, and I think particularly smells. I think we lose touch with quite how important scents are to us as a human being. It's said that the olfactory sense, the sense of smell, is the one that's most closely linked to memory. This might not be quite so true for you, but certainly for me as an adult, once you get a little bit further on in life, the smell of cut grass instantly takes me back to being 8 years old and playing rugby on an autumn morning. The smell of apples instantly takes me back to the apple orchards and scrumping when I was a kid. You know, our link from memory to smell is very, very well proven. And so I always try and write down the scents of things around me, the scent of a giant pepper vine, the scent of a particular flower when it's in bloom, the scent of a street that is crowded with human beings, and you have the smell of frying food. All those things, I think, can bring that situation to life. So I make sure that I write them down in my diary, and that I try and bring them to play in my books. Okay, from Trinity School, doesn't say where Trinity School is, but hello to everyone there. How many different languages can you speak, and what is the best language to learn if you want to be an explorer? Okay, so I have an unusual memory. I pick up languages very, very quickly, but then I forget them almost instantly the second that I leave. So I spent about a year in Japan, and by the time I left, my Japanese was really, really good. If I went back there for a couple of weeks, it would get good again, but at the moment it's pitiful. Likewise with Indonesian and Malay, which I speak very, very well when I'm out there, and at the moment I probably couldn't remember about 10 words. As for the best languages to learn if you're going to be an explorer, well, you want to learn the language of the place you're going to. And to begin with, that is purely going to be sign language, you know, the universal languages of I want something to eat or I want somewhere to sleep. But after a while, you learn that you can get a disproportionate amount out of just learning how to say hello, or learning how to say thank you in a local person's language. That can be really difficult and really challenging. In New Guinea, for example, where I do a lot of expeditions, there may be 1,500 different languages, not dialects, languages, and those languages can be as distinct as English is from Swahili. So it can be very, very difficult, but the amount that you gain from simply learning how to, you know, having gone to their country as an outsider, you owe them that out of politeness, the at least willingness to learn a few words of their language. So as an explorer, I think that's really important, that you try and you make the effort. Can I take another question from the audience, please?
How long did it take you to write Wilds of the Wolf?
So Wilds of the Wolf was the quickest one for me to write, because I think it was one of those ones that I really got the story very clearly in my head. I knew exactly how I wanted it to go. It was very clear, very precise. It had what's called a linear narrative, so the structure flowed in one continuous form, unlike the middle novel, Ghosts of the Forest. It was bouncing backwards and forwards from different times and places. And so I found it really, really easy to write that book. And I think I wrote it, the first draft, in about 5 weeks, which is very unusual. I think Ghosts of the Forest took me about 7 or 8 months. So it's really, really different depending on how, I guess, clear the story is to you at that moment in time. Good question. Okay, I have a question here from St. Paul's Primary School in Cheshire, who ask, what is your favourite book and who is your favourite author? Well, my favourite single book is called The Malay Archipelago, and it's written by a man called Alfred Russel Wallace, who is a great hero of mine. Wallace was around about the same time as Darwin, And he wrote about quite similar things, but he had such a different style to Darwin. I mean, obviously, as someone who's fascinated by the natural sciences, I very much admire Darwin's work, but it can be quite dry. It's very, very factual, whereas Wallace's writing is more like an adventure travel story. And, you know, he writes about encountering cannibals and discovering new species in places that even now, today, I know are still very wild and challenging. And I think to have been on his expeditions and going out and discovering new things every single day would have been mind-blowing. It would have been absolutely incredible. So, yes, I think that the Malay Archipelago is my favourite book. As for who my favourite writer is, it's probably someone called Gabriel Garcia Marquez, who's a Colombian writer who won the Nobel Prize for Literature. And he has a phenomenal way with language and a phenomenal way of conjuring up places and times. He has a style which is called magic realism, which is a way of just writing as if you're creating something true, but there are elements of the hyper-real, of the metaphysical about the things that he's conjuring, and I just find it entrancing. There are some of his books. There's one of his books called 100 Years of Solitude, which I've read about 10 times, and every time I go back to it, I find something new in it, and I find myself getting to the end and deeply, deeply saddened to finish the book because I don't want to lose those characters out of my life. They're people that I kind of feel I know, and it's almost like a mini mourning at the end of the book because I don't want to let them disappear. I know that sounds crazy. Another question from the audience, please.
What's made you start writing fiction books?
So I pretty much always knew that I was going to do something with animals and wildlife, but the thing that I found easiest when I was at school was reading and writing. So I quite struggled with science. I had to come back to science later on in life because I found it quite difficult, whereas English I always found really easy, and I can get through a book very, very quickly, and my first degree was in that. And so it seemed very natural for me to get into writing, and as I started off to begin with writing travel books for the rough guides. But I always had in the back of my mind this idea of writing a fiction novel, and I thought that maybe that was just lunacy and crazy and that I'd never get around to it. But then having my publishers have so much faith in me and what I could do really kind of set me on the road and allowed me to trust myself and give it a go, and I'm very, very glad that I did. Okay, so I have one here from Holland Junior School in Surrey. In your book, Tiger Wars, Saker is the member of the clan, and each member of the clan has their own animal identity. Which animal do you identify with, and why? Okay, that's a really super question, actually. Very good. And I've not thought about that, which animal I would be. I think most of my friends would say that my kind of most overwhelming part of my personality is my enthusiasm. And so I'd probably be a big Labradoodle puppy because I'm just constantly running around just like, oh, this is great, this is the best thing ever, everything's fantastic. But that's not exactly a lethal, scary member of the clan to be associated with, really, is it? Yeah, I'm Tiger, I'm Panther, I'm Labradoodle. Wouldn't really work. What would I be if I was going to be something scary? I mean, I guess I said earlier on that without noticing it, I had very much based Saker on myself and based Sinter on my sister. So with that in mind, perhaps I would also be something like a bird of prey, something like Saker, although, to be frank, that is much, much cooler than I will ever be. Another one from the audience, please.
How do you feel when you're writing your stories?
That's a super question, and it's very, very different depending on how the stories are going. So if it's going well, and I'm, like I said earlier on, if I'm in that mode where it feels like there is a movie playing in my head and I'm just recording it, it is the most exhilarating thing in the world. And believe it or not, I've been known to write as much as 7,000 words in a day, and to anyone out there who writes, that is a crazy amount. And quite often I'll go back through it and I'll go, and most of it is nonsense and rubbish. But it has been literally that I cannot stop typing from the very first minute I wake up until the time when my eyes are closing 18 hours later. Those days when it's like that are unbelievable and the most ecstatic I can possibly talk about. I mean, it's just fantastic. Other days I will write nothing at all, or I'll write 100 words and go back and just cut it because it's rubbish. So it depends totally on how I'm feeling and how the story is working for me. Okay, let's go to another from Robert Kett Primary School in Norfolk. Why did you want to study wild animals and risk your life to do so? Well, let's get to the second part of that question first. I really do not want to risk my life to work with wild animals. I know that I made this series called Deadly for 8 years and was filming, great white sharks and crocodiles and venomous snakes. But to me, the essential bit is that everyone knows that it is about how wild animals interact with their prey, not how they're dangerous to us as human beings. Far from it. If I swim out of a cage alongside a great white shark, it is because at that moment in time, I believe it's safe. Because I've looked at that great white shark and its posture in the water and its body language, and if its pectoral fins are dropped down below it like this, and its back's arched, and its mouth's open, its gills are billowing, and its movements are angular and erratic, then it is in full-on predatory mode, and I stay in the cage because it would be dangerous to swim out alongside it. If all those things are reversed, if the pectoral fins are spread wide, its back is nice and flat, and it's moving in a lazy, languid fashion, those sharks will not target us. In clear water, they can see us. They know that we are not their chosen prey. We don't have anything like enough blubber or fat, calorie-rich fat, to be of any interest to them, and they will actively swim around you to get to the food. And, I've spent a lot of years building up the knowledge and experience to know that, and therefore to feel comfortable swimming out alongside them. I wouldn't do it if I thought it was dangerous, because nothing is worth risking this unbelievable, treasured life, the greatest gift that we have, and also because I have more respect for animals than that, and I wouldn't want to do things that deliberately put me at risk at the expense of possibly stressing out an animal. One more from the audience, please.
Did you actually go into the woods to create your book Tiger Wars?
I have spent a lot of time, I do spend a lot of time living in all the environments that I have talked about in my books. They're places that are totally familiar to me. I probably spend as much time in those environments as you spend here in this school. I know as much about them, and that's why I chose to write about them, because they are the thing that is closest to me and the thing that I understand more than perhaps anything else. Okay, let's do another question from Wonersh and Shamley Green Primary School in Surrey. Thinking back, what is the most dangerous thing you have done? Well, actually, it probably wasn't anything to do with animals. As I said earlier on, wild animals very, very rarely mean us as human beings any harm whatsoever. Probably the most dangerous thing was an expedition that I did earlier this year to a place called Venezuela. And we were trying to make the first ascent of a mountain there that had never been climbed, living on the vertical rock faces of this mountain. And it was much more challenging than we expected. There was a lot of rockfall, that came very, very close to us as we were on the rocks. And it was an expedition that genuinely brought grown men to tears. Not me, obviously. That goes without saying. But it was an expedition where we all came very, very close to the limit, and where we all came away thinking that we'd been very, very lucky to escape with our lives. And, I don't particularly want to go through that again, but if you want to see it, then I think it's going to be on the BBC early next year. I'm not exactly sure when. Another one from the audience, please.
Which book are you most proud of, and why?
Which book am I most proud of? I think, well, the first one, Tiger Wars, was a great challenge for me, because I'd never written fiction before. I'd probably written a couple of fiction stories when I was, you guys' age, when I was at school, and as you can probably tell from looking at all the wrinkles on my face, that was a long, long time ago. So to come back and write a 60,000 word book, and for it to kind of hang together, felt like a bit of a triumph. But I was so much more excited to finish Wilds of the Wolf, the third book, because I felt it was my best. I felt it was the clearest in its purpose, in its story, and I was really, really proud of it, overwhelmingly so. So yeah, I think Wilds of the Wolf would be my favourite. Oh yes, I've got here from Herschel Community Primary School in Coventry. How many countries have you visited around the world, and which was your favourite? I've been to 105 countries around the world, which is quite a lot until you consider that there are well over 200 countries around the world. Depending on how you delineate what makes a country, there could be as much as 260 countries around the world. So despite the fact that I've been traveling for most of my life, I have not even got halfway there. And some of those countries, Brazil, for example, I think we've been to Brazil 12 times filming, and I look at the areas on the map of where I've been in Brazil, and it's nothing. We haven't even scratched the surface. It's got this huge, vast country, most of which we've not seen any of. So I've got an awful lot left to do, which is very, very exciting. As to which is my favourite, I have to say it is the UK. I absolutely love this country that I've chosen to make my home. I mean, I could live anywhere around the world, but I still live here because I think that we have incredible landscapes and animals, and I just absolutely treasure this place. And I need you all to know that adventure begins at home. Adventure begins in your back garden. Despite the fact that I talk a lot about the world's most exotic places, if you're going to get into a lifetime of adventure and a lifetime of wildlife and natural history, it's got to start at home. You know, you can't just have adventures when you're lucky enough to go away on a foreign holiday somewhere. It has to start right here. And we're very lucky in this part of the country. You know, we have wonderful countryside around us. It's very easy to access. And now, this time in history is the best time ever to learn about it. You know, it's so easy to get on your laptop, and if you've been out and you've seen a kind of butterfly or a moth that you don't know and you can't identify, to find out what it is, that's incredibly easy now. So yes, we need to learn to treasure living here because it's a very, very special part of the world, and it's my favourite. Okay, I think this might be the last question.
Which of your books is your favourite?
We just answered that one. Can we do one more?
What is your next book about?
So, my next book is going to be called Shark Seas, and the clue is in the title. It is about sharks. They're a group of animals that I am fascinated by, one that's been around on the planet for at least 400 million years, and yet now, at this time in history, is in more danger of disappearing and becoming extinct than ever before. We could easily lose sharks from the world's oceans now. And so, my two characters are going to journey out into the world's oceans. I'm not going to give too much away because it doesn't come out until next year, but it's going to be a big adventure, and they're going to have some part to play in the catastrophe that is facing sharks around the world's oceans. But my primary goal really is first and foremost to make sure people are not frightened of sharks and that people learn to love sharks, because that's the only way that people are going to want to learn to save them or want to save them, is if first of all they treasure them. Thank you all so much for coming here this morning. Thank you to our friends all over the country and to our friends in India as well for this Children's Authors Live event. And particularly thank you to everyone here at Crosfields School in Reading for being such wonderful hosts. I hope that you enjoy the books. I hope you enjoy reading, and maybe that some of you will want to get into writing and possibly into some of the conservation themes that I've mentioned as well. But a massive thanks from me, Steve Backshall. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you.